Alright, so 1344, Sponsorship Agreement, a mandatory sponsors form required to be filled out when you are doing your spousal sponsorship application for Canada. So in this video, we'll cover who needs to fill this out, where to download this from, a general overview of this form, how to digitally sign it, and finally where to upload it in the online portal. So as of now, July 2023, this form 1344 is a PDF downloadable form, meaning it's meant to be downloaded from the Guide 5289 as a PDF document, then filled out in your computer using the Adobe or Acrobat Reader software, and then uploaded into the online portal under the principal applicant's account when you are submitting your application. So to download this form, you'll first get to this page. This is the official guide for spousal sponsorship, Guide 5289. Always start with this page and always download all your forms and instructions from this page. Don't Google any PDF forms because you may end up with an older version. So scroll down a little and then under step 3, complete the application. You'll see the sponsor must fill out these PDF forms. So this 1344 is listed under the forms required by the sponsor. So this 1344 is primarily a sponsor's form, hence the name Sponsorship Agreement and Undertaking. By completing this form, the sponsor is basically agreeing to take care of the principal applicant's basic needs for 3 years after they become a permanent resident. So you click this link and then depending on the browser that you're using, you're most likely going to end up with a page like this. So for example, if you're using Google Chrome or Safari, you will get a page like this. So don't panic, this is how it's supposed to be. You are simply going to locate this download option here. So hit that and then this form is going to download to your desktop or downloads folder wherever you want to save it. So let's say it saves to your downloads folder. So what you'll do is locate your downloads folder in your local device, meaning your computer, your laptop or MacBook, whatever you're using, and then double click to open this form from there. That's how this is going to open up like this. And you'll need an Adobe Acrobat Reader to be able to open this. So here's the form, it's about 7 pages. If you quickly scroll down, you'll see this date here, 9/2022. This simply means that this form was last updated September 2022. And this is the version that we just downloaded fresh from the Guide 5289 as of July 2023. So this means that this is the latest version of the form and you are good to use it. So let's say you are doing this application in December 2023 or February 2024. This date might change because they might update the form. That's why always download it from the Guide 5289. But for now, 9/2022 is the latest version, so this will work. So who needs to fill this out? The sponsor is supposed to fill this out with majority of their information and some basic details about the principal applicant. But keep in mind, for your sponsorship application, only one 1344 is required. So not one for sponsor and one for principal applicant, just a single form, information about the sponsor in that form and some basic details about the principal applicant in that form also, and then both digitally sign the same form and upload it to the online portal. So let's quickly go through this form. We'll assume that I'm the sponsor, sponsoring my wife, who's the principal applicant. And that's how we'll fill out this form. Alright, so part 1, question 1, if found ineligible to sponsor, for majority of the applicants, this first option, withdraw your sponsorship application, will apply. There is no need to select this option because if the sponsor is not found eligible to sponsor, then the application is not really going to be approved. So this second option is mostly for humanitarian reasons. So this won't apply to majority of the applicants out there. So just select this first option, you should be fine. Then language of correspondence, so English or French, whichever works for you. Then is there a co-signer? So for spousal sponsorship, there is no co-signer. So you just select no. Then person you're sponsoring, meaning the principal applicant. So I'm the sponsor, so I will list my wife's full name here, exactly as it's shown on her passport. So her last name here under family name, and her first name here under given name, and her date of birth here. All these details should exactly match her passport. Now, if you don't have a last name on your passport, then you can simply enter the first name under the family name section, because as you can see, this is a mandatory field and you can simply leave the given name field blank. And if they don't have a first name, again, leave this given name field blank and enter whatever name is shown on the passport in the family name section, because this is a mandatory field, so it has to be populated. Then number 6, the principal applicant is your. So you'll have a list here, and depending on the type of sponsorship you're doing, you will have a couple of options here. So if you're sponsoring your common law partner who's living inside Canada, then you select this option. But if we talk about spouse, you'll again have 3 options. So first one is the spouse living in Canada. So obviously if your spouse is living with you in Canada and you're applying under the spouse or common law partner in Canada class, then you'll select this option. If your spouse is living in Canada but you still are applying under family class, you can do that. Then you will select the second option. And if your spouse is living outside of Canada, then you'll simply select this option, spouse living outside Canada. For example, I was the sponsor sponsoring my wife who was outside of Canada at the time, and that's why this third option, spouse living outside of Canada, applied to me. So make sure you select the right option here, because a lot of applications get rejected because people select the wrong class. I've made a detailed video on how classes work showing up on the cards here, also linked in the description below. If you're confused about classes, you can give that a watch after you're done watching this video. It's linked in the description below. Then sponsor personal details. So again, these are all my details. So my last name and first name exactly as it appears on my passport. Then have you used any other nickname? This was no for me. Then gender, date of birth, place of birth, country, all pretty straightforward. Then status in Canada. So keep in mind, you either have to be a permanent resident or citizen of Canada, only then you can sponsor your spouse. So you have to be either one of those. So if you are a Canadian citizen by birth, you select this and this will all go away. If you became a Canadian citizen during your time in Canada, then you'll select this option, naturalized Canadian citizen. And then you can find the date you became a Canadian citizen on your citizenship certificate, and that certificate will most likely also have your UCI ID. If you are a PR, then you'll select permanent resident, date on which you became a permanent resident. For this, you can simply look into your sponsor's COPR document. It will have this date right here as you see on the screen. And UCI also you can find in your sponsor's COPR. So this is my UCI ID as listed in my COPR. So I'll simply list that here. Then name at the time you became a PR. So my name did not change. So I'm simply going to select yes, and this is going to gray out. Then current marital status. So this was married for me. And then here I'd list my exact date of marriage. This is the legal official date of your marriage, which is found on your marriage certificate. This is not necessarily the same date as the date on which you had ceremonies or maybe had a religious wedding. Always make sure that the date that you put here for your marriage is from your official valid marriage certificate. The name of your current spouse or common law partner. So again, this is the last name and first name of my wife. We already talked about this. Number 9, previously been married or in a common law relationship. So this was no for me. So if you were married before, then you will select yes, then provide all the details here. Alright, so next up is sponsor's contact information. First up, they ask you to provide the current mailing address. So this is the current mailing address of the sponsor where you want to receive all your correspondence from IRCC. They're not really going to send you anything via paper at this point, but they still ask you for your mailing address in case they have to send you something. So if the sponsor has a PO box setup, then you can definitely list that here. But my guess is for majority of the sponsors, the mailing address is going to be the same as your residential address as long as you are living in Canada. So you can just list your current residential address here under the mailing address section. So leave the PO box empty. It's not really going to apply for most. Provide an apartment number if you live in an apartment building. Also the street number, this is very important. Then the street name, and the rest of the address is pretty straightforward. Then residential address. So if it's the same as your mailing address, which would be the case for most sponsors, simply check this box, yes, and then all these fields are going to gray out. This was the case for me also. I was a sponsor living in Canada at the time and my wife was in India. So I wanted to receive all communication at my residential address. That's why my mailing and residential address were the same. So I only had to enter the mailing address and then check this box, and that took care of the address part for me. And I did not really receive any documents from IRCC at this address, except for I think I received sponsor eligibility letter, but that was it. All other communication came to my email. Then for telephone number, I just selected Canada and I listed my Canada telephone number here under cellular. Then alternate telephone number and fax number I simply left blank. These fields are not really required. And then email address. So this is again important. I provided my email address here, meaning the sponsor's email address. The sponsor's email address is important because down the line, when IRCC wants to send you acknowledgement of receipt after doing the completeness check, they will send that to the sponsor's email. Also, having the correct email address listed here for the sponsor is going to make it easier for you down the line when you attempt to track your application by creating an account in the PR tracker. The sponsor's email address also becomes important if they are acting as a representative. Because if the sponsor is acting as a representative, which I was for my wife, then all the communication, AOR, biometrics, medical, passport requests for my wife will go to me at my email address. And that's the importance of the correct email address for the sponsor. The next up is sponsor residency declaration. So it says, are you a Canadian citizen living exclusively outside of Canada? So if you are a citizen of Canada sponsoring your spouse living outside of Canada at this point, then this applies to you. So you'll check yes. And then you'll tell them where you intend to live in Canada once your partner becomes a permanent resident. So it can be any other province outside of Quebec, or it can be the province of Quebec. And if you are a Canadian citizen who's already in Canada, then you can simply select no, and these two options are going to gray out. So if you are a permanent resident and sponsoring your spouse, which was my case, I was in Canada at the time. So again, this was no for me. Keep in mind, as a permanent resident who's a sponsor, you have to be living inside Canada to sponsor your spouse. You cannot sponsor your spouse from outside of Canada as a permanent resident. You can only do that as a Canadian citizen. Okay, so make sure you understand your residency obligations as a sponsor. You can read more about it in the Guide 5289. The next up is sponsor eligibility assessment. So let's quickly get through these. So first up, are you 18 or older? It has to be a yes. The next up, are you a Canadian citizen or permanent resident? So we just went over this. You have to be either a Canadian citizen or a permanent resident to sponsor your spouse. So this has to be a yes. Then third one, family class or spouse or common law partner in Canada class. So this also has to be a yes. You can only select from either one of these classes. So you're either doing a family class sponsorship, meaning an outland sponsorship, or an inland sponsorship, which is the spouse or common law partner in Canada class. So this will also be a yes. Then do you reside in Canada and in no other country? So this simply means at the time of submitting the application, where is the sponsor living? So obviously you have to be living inside Canada as a permanent resident of Canada to be able to do this. So you will be selecting yes. If you're a Canadian citizen and living in Canada, then you'll still select yes. But let's say you're a Canadian citizen sponsoring your spouse and not living in Canada. Let's say you're living outside of Canada at the time. So you will have to select no, and you can still sponsor because you are a Canadian citizen. Keep in mind, as a permanent resident, you cannot sponsor your spouse from outside Canada. So if you are a permanent resident and outside of Canada, then this answer becomes no, and then you're not eligible to sponsor. So don't submit your application. Only Canadian citizens can sponsor from outside Canada. Permanent residents have to be inside Canada to sponsor. So I selected yes because I was a permanent resident and I was in Canada at the time. So I met the sponsor obligations for residency, and that's why I was eligible to sponsor. Then number 5, in the 5 years preceding this application, did you become a PR after being sponsored as a spouse, common law, or conjugal partner? So this is just asking that in the previous 5 years, meaning the 5 years from the time you're doing the application, was I sponsored myself as a spouse of somebody else? So just to give you an example, let's say I am sponsoring my partner, I'm a permanent resident, but this is my second marriage, and I was sponsored as a permanent resident under family class from my first marriage. So let's say whoever my partner was 5 years ago or 4 years ago, they sponsored me as a permanent resident. So I became a permanent resident as a result of spousal sponsorship. And now I'm sponsoring somebody else because the first marriage ended. And the 5-year period has not passed since the time that I became a permanent resident as a result of spousal sponsorship. So if the 5-year period has not passed since the sponsor themselves became a permanent resident as a result of spousal sponsorship, they cannot sponsor their second partner or their next partner. You have to wait and cross the 5-year period, and then you can sponsor the second partner. Okay, so moving right along, just know that from question 6 through question 15, if you answer yes to any of these questions, you're not eligible to sponsor. Also, if you are sponsoring from Quebec, then you don't really need to answer question 8, 9, 10 and 15. And that's why these questions are not really marked with an asterisk. So number 6, have you submitted a previous application in respect to which a final decision has not been made for the person being sponsored and their family members? So this means that if you have a pending sponsorship application, then you cannot sponsor your partner at this point. Okay, so that was not the case for me. I did not have any pending application, so I'll select no. The number 7, are you in receipt of social assistance for a reason other than disability? So social assistance is just welfare. So just know that the sponsor cannot be collecting welfare. If you are, then you cannot sponsor your spouse. And if you have a student loan, say OSAP, or if you are taking paid benefits such as employment insurance, you are still fine. That is not really considered welfare. You just can't be collecting welfare as a sponsor, meaning you cannot be on social assistance. So this was no for me as well. Then number 8, are you an undischarged bankrupt under the Bankruptcy and Insolvency Act? This was no for me too. Then number 9, have persons you previously sponsored or their family members received social assistance during the validity period of the undertaking? This was also no for me. Number 10, did you co-sign an undertaking where the sponsored person or his or her family members received social assistance? Again, this should also be no. Have you been ordered to leave Canada? Should be no. Are you late in making payments? This should also be no. Are you currently in jail? This should be no. Have you been convicted of a sexual offense? Should be no. Are you in default of a court order? Also no. Are you the subject of an application to revoke your citizenship? Should be no. Then inadmissibility should be no. Charged with an offense should be no. And that completes your eligibility. Alright, so next up is the signature section. This section causes a lot of confusion, so pay attention here. As you can see, it says that I agree that by typing my name, I am electronically signing my application. So again, this is our guide. If I scroll down, click on step 3, complete the application, scroll down a little bit more. And as you can see under 1344, it says you and the person you are sponsoring, meaning the sponsor and the principal applicant, must both electronically sign this application. If I scroll down even further and go up to the specific instructions for 1344, as you can see, it says here, this form must be filled out and digitally signed by the sponsor and the principal applicant. Ignore the co-signer because it doesn't apply. So digital and electronic signature means the same thing. It means to type your name using your keyboard in these boxes provided, your name exactly as it appears on your passport. So this is the sponsor signature section, meaning my signature section. I'm the sponsor. So I will have to type my full name here. So my first name and my last name exactly as it appears on my passport that you can see on the screen here. The order that it appears in my passport doesn't really matter. As long as the name as it appears on the passport is the same, you should be fine. So that completes my digital signature, and I'm simply going to enter the date that I am signing this form, and that completes the sponsors part. Now again, this middle field, you have to completely leave this blank because it does not apply to spousal sponsorship, so don't bother about this. Then here, this is the section where the principal applicant or my wife, the one who's being sponsored for permanent residence, has to sign. So now if your spouse is with you at the time when you're doing this application, they can simply use the same computer and type their name in this box provided exactly as it matches their passport, and then they can put the date here, and that will complete their signature section. If your spouse is not with you, which was my case, I was in Canada, my spouse was in India at the time, what I would do in order to obey the regulations is to first complete my section, save this form, then send it to my wife, and then she would open this in her computer, she would complete her signature section, and then she would put the date here, and that's how her signature section would be completed. And that's how the principal applicant and the sponsor are going to digitally sign this form. This is what digital or electronic signature means. And so don't print this form out to hand sign it and scan it back. They've clearly stated the instructions, the signatures have to be digital. It used to be the case until last year that they would expect you to do hand signatures on this form, even though the form clearly instructed at that point also to do digital signatures. But that confusion has been cleared since. They have been notified, so now they are aware that this form has to be digitally signed. So they should not technically reject your application just for digitally signing it. It's very rare that they reject it for hand signatures, and in those cases you'll just have to respond back. Also keep in mind that IRCC reserves the right to request hand signatures at any point during the processing of your application. So if they want to, they can request hand signatures. But usually for majority of the applicants, it should not happen. So once the entire form is filled up and all these digital signatures are done, that's when you can hit the validate button and you'll get this message, validation completed successfully, if all the form is complete. If any fields are missing, then it's going to give you that message. So make sure you get this message, validation completed successfully, then you hit OK. And then if you scroll down, you will see these barcodes generated. So these barcodes mean that the form is now complete and can be submitted. So you don't have to do anything else with the form, meaning you don't have to print this out, hand sign it and scan it back. You don't also have to use your iPad, pencil or digital pen to sign it here, because you've already done your digital signatures using your keyboard, just typing your names as per your passport. So if you print this out, hand sign it and scan it back, then what can happen is you might end up smushing these barcodes. And these barcodes are literally being used to transmit information between IRCC systems once your application gets submitted. So if these barcodes are damaged, then it creates a lot of issues for the IRCC officer to transmit the information. So don't print and scan it back. Simply complete the form right here in your computer, digitally sign it, generate barcodes. Once you generate your barcodes, make sure everything is complete. If you want, double check, triple check, quadruple check. Once you feel confident with the form, then hit file, save this. Then come back to the online portal under the principal applicant's account, locate this 1344, and then here you can upload the saved and signed copy of the 1344 that you just worked on. And you don't really have to label the form with last name, first name and form type or something like that. That labeling instruction that you see here is just for supporting documents. So you can simply label this form as IMM 1344 and you should be fine. So when you try to upload your form here in the online portal, sometimes you may encounter an issue that there was a technical error with your upload or your upload might not work. So make sure that your form is less than or equal to 4 megabytes. If for some reason the size of the form is greater than 4 megabytes, then the upload might fail. So if it is more than 4 megabytes, maybe work with another version of the form or try to reduce the size by compressing it, and obviously make sure that the form is complete. If after doing all of this, your upload still fails, then sometimes you might have to clear your cache in your browser or clear your history and then log out and log in again and try again. If it doesn't work, you may have to try another browser, but eventually it ends up working. So now that you know how digital signatures work, you might be interested to know how to digitally sign the 5532, which might be a little tricky at first. So here's a video where I talk about that in detail. It should help you out. I'll see you there.